Good evening, everyone, or whatever time of day it is you're watching or listening to this, but it is evening for us. My name is Andrew, and I'm joined by one of my best friends, Will, and we are the 3D printing gurus that host the Unwinding the Spool Podcast. Recently, we've started this podcast to talk about all things related to 3D printing, all the way from the very basics to the very experienced, expert-level advanced things as we pump out more episodes. So in tonight's episode, we will be talking about 3D models that you can download basically for free from the web to 3D print on your printer at home or at school or wherever you have access to a 3D printer. There are some awesome things that you can download from the web and make some really cool models that are great for little knickknacks, trinkets, and also functional 3D prints. But when you are doing this, there are some very common pitfalls that you might run into. So our goal is to talk about those pitfalls and then talk about how these models can also be super awesome with very little to no effort at all. So, Will, do you want to talk about point one on the agenda today? We're going to talk about the two major sites where you can get models like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick it off, we'll start off with one of my favorites, which is prusaprints.org. So Prusa is the fantastic printer manufacturer, and they have a really great website for all of their 3D prints called prusaprinters.org/prints. And on that site, why I like it is that it's a super great user interface in terms of trying to find something. They've got great categories. They've got everything from, what kind of printer you have to, what category in terms of, is it made for art and design, costume and accessories, fashion, gadgets, healthcare, household, learning, all these things. And so there's a lot of awesome models. They're also all, because of the place that they're put on, and we'll talk about this a little more in Thingiverse, when we talk about the next piece, but on prusaprints.org, every single print has been made. That's part of kind of the process. So you know that someone actually had to print it, and in this case, usually it's printed specifically on a Prusa printer. So in my case, I use a Prusa Mark III, and I know that that way that I know that it works for my printer specifically, and so they have categories for all of that and things like that. In terms of also the variety and the quality of the models, they all tend to be really geared towards FDM desktop printing as well. And so that's really helpful if you're getting into the 3D printing game. So yeah, that's what I'd have to say about Prusa printers. Just a lot of awesome different opportunities. One of my favorite models that I've ever got from them is I made I 3D printed a shoe stand. There was two end pieces, and then you put a piece of wood between them, and they fit perfectly, and it was just all this... Basically, it exposed the infill, so you could see this really cool hexagon pattern filling the shoe stand end. So that was kind of one of my favorite models from there, and they're all really just well done. However, your choices are a little more limited than our next site.
Yeah. Well, according to the site, it has a little tag at the top that says beta, so I'm guessing this is a relatively new thing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, it's been up for a few years, but yeah, it's the first few years of its life.
Right. Well, it's pretty cool. I actually wasn't even aware that they had this until we started kind of going over our agenda tonight. So that's pretty cool. It's almost like a selling point to buy a Prusa because,
absolutely,
as what we'll talk about shortly here with Thingiverse, like you said, everything here is really standardized and optimized and tuned for your Prusa printers. So like I said, it's going to be closer to a plug and play type situation, whereas Thingiverse is going to possibly require some level of tuning or adjustability with the models you download.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think it's still good because it brings in community support. So it's still very much community submissions, people submitting it from outside Prusa's own organization. But it's also somewhat reviewed. It's a little more curated.
Okay. Yeah, Thingiverse is kind of like the wild, wild west of 3D printing models.
Exactly.
Cool.
I was just playing Red Dead Redemption, so I feel
nice.
like it's very,
that's a great game.
Great game.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. So yeah, if you guys have a Prusa, definitely check out prusaprinters.org, or if you're looking at buying a 3D printer, check out this site because it might, kind of push you towards buying a Prusa if you like a lot of the models that are available and you kind of want a more, tight-knit community. I know that's kind of one of the big points with Prusa too, is like Creality. It's a huge community, but with Prusa, it's a little bit more refined. I think, you can get some better answers and whatnot on their forums and sites like that. So yeah, definitely some really cool models on here. Like this one, I'm just seeing this Raspberry Pi case with this cool like hexagon shape and everything. We even got some some seasonal items. We got some 3D printable Christmas tree ornaments, which I have had a 3D printer for almost 2 years now at home, and I am surprised that I have not 3D printed a Christmas ornament, so that's probably going to be on my to-do list.
You haven't asked the wife a single thing if she wants a Christmas ornament. Wow.
Yeah, well, It's probably going to start with me printing like a race car Christmas ornament or a fighter jet, and then
yes.
And then it'll go from there. So I have another to-do item for myself is 3D print a Christmas ornament.
Yeah, so there you go.
So yeah, that's a great site. So let's go on to the next one, because there are a bunch of different sites where you can download printable models from, but we're going to focus on kind of like the two large ones, and the most popular ones for the sake of time and everything. So the next one is Thingiverse, and so this is Thingiverse.com. It is a website. Is it hosted by MakerBot or just founded by MakerBot?
I think it was purchased and now hosted by.
Okay, so
it's also just a quick thing because I say this to my middle schoolers. It's like Universe, but with Thingiverse.
Yeah. Sometimes spelling can be difficult, especially with weird words that aren't actual words.
That are not words.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like I've tried communicating, like if I'm at work or something and I'm on a call or someone asks me in person, like, "Oh, where'd you get that model from of whatever thing?" And I'm like, "Oh, from Thingiverse." And they're like, "Huh?"
Sorry?
They look at me like it's some like Narnia type place.
Well, they look at me like I misspoke. Like I said, like I was coming up with something on the fly.
Right.
Like
you meshed two words together.
Thingiverse. I don't know.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, right. But yeah, no, this site is great. I've been using it for quite a long time now, ever since I really got introduced to 3D printing by you and the team at UCI back in, 2015, I think it was. And so it's been around for a while. And with that being said, there are tons of models on this site. Like,
infinite.
It's pretty interesting. I mean, I have this as a bookmarked like favorite home screen app on my iPhone, and I'll just click it just to go on, every week and see, because on the homepage they'll feature the popular items that have been being downloaded frequently. But yeah, so Thingiverse is great. Lots of models over the years in many different categories, all the way from, like I said in the introduction, functional 3D prints, so things for around the house, things for your car, things for outdoor stuff, and then also even like little like there's like 3D printed quick release buckles, so even like camping stuff, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or just artsy things, decorative little trinkets to put on your desk or ornaments for your tree. So yeah, anything you want to kind of touch on when we like the overall picture of Thingiverse?
Yeah, with the overall picture of Thingiverse, it's definitely a just huge, just monolith of STL 3D models, and it accepts everything and everyone, and that's both good and bad, because you'll get a lot of models that just don't work. You'll get models that just have never actually been 3D printed, all those kinds of things. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on. But just the overall thing is, like, I will say Thingiverse is like the go-to, because where selection is limited on Prusa prints, selection is almost unlimited on Thingiverse. Right. And I will say the one thing also is their search system is terrible. Like, the internal search system of Thingiverse is trash.
Yeah.
So always just Google whatever you want and then put Thingiverse in it, and it will way better index the site than Thingiverse's own search system.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll have to try that next time because I obviously look for a lot of car stuff, so I'll have to try that.
Yeah, obviously, definitely try it because it can't, unless you type the exact title of a thing, it might not even bring it up into the search results.
Right. Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah, and I think one of the all-time most popular models to print, have you ever seen that cutaway of that jet engine with like all those different parts?
Everyone does it. Matter hackers did it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty cool model for testing your printer, and I think it's like 40 different parts or something like that, something crazy. So yeah, so there's a lot of really cool models on there. So if you're interested, if you're looking for something specific for a project or something at home or at work, or if you just want to kind of see what's interesting on there and then be like, ooh, I could use one of those and 3D print that. So,
I mean, to talk to you about like the craziness that is the amount of selection on Thingiverse, a few years ago, one of our team members at the UCI lab, they had their parents' old dryer broke, and it was a part that just wasn't manufactured anymore at all by the person who made it. And we were about to like have to go in and make all these measurements and model it. Someone had already modeled it and put it on Thingiverse.
That's so funny.
Very specific plastic handle part.
Yeah.
And it was just, boom, it was there. And so that's just the insanity that is the amount of stuff on Thingiverse.
Yeah, no, it's really crazy. And this is also a site too. So if you guys watch a lot of YouTube videos on 3D printing, on learning how to use your printer, set it up, this is the site where a lot of people go to get those test files. So if you've ever seen someone print the infamous 3D Benchy little tugboat, that's usually where this is from. Or the all-in-one 3D printer test. I actually just did a few of those at work that tests like it's a stress test for your printer. It tests the tolerances, the bridging capabilities, the overhang capabilities. So this is also a great site where you can get prints like that to calibrate and test your printer as well.
Absolutely.
So okay, cool. So we kind of got a basic overview of the two sites that we're going to be looking at. So kind of our next talking point is when you're looking at a model to download, and granted, you might be limited in selection if what you're looking for is very specific, but there are certain things that you want to look for when you're trying to download a already modeled file for printing yourself. And the big one is on Thingiverse, what you're going to see is there's a few ways, and it's kind of like buying something on Amazon, you always look at the reviews, like, how many 1-star reviews, how many, pictures of people posted of the product actually working. So I don't know if Prusa Printers is the same thing. Do they do this, Will? Do you know? With like how many makes it has and whatnot?
Yeah, they will. They'll have it on the side. When you select a piece, they'll have how many people made it and how, like, what they were making with.
So both sites should have this, but basically how you're going to gauge if a model has been printed heavily is, the first one is, how many likes it has. So that just shows you kind of in a general point of view how popular is the model. But a more accurate way to tell, like, okay, this file, this STL file that this person uploaded, or STL files for an assembly, have been printed heavily is how many makes is what they call it. So basically, I think what you do is you download the files, and then on your Thingiverse account, once you made it, I think you just click I made it or something like that. I think that's how it works.
Right. Exactly. You say, I made this.
And so you can upload a picture, and so you can see, a lot of people's, personal results on like how it turned out for them and with different materials and whatnot. The other thing too that you can look out for is on each printer file on Thingiverse, there's a comment section. So it's kind of like another way to look at reviews is like the comments that it has, like people asking questions or people recommending certain settings, yada, yada. Or the thing that you should look at first is in the details section for the model. Oftentimes, like a person who's well versed with kind of creating and uploading these models to a site like this, they'll put things like the optimal printer settings, what printer they printed it on, any extra hardware like bolts and nuts that you'll need to assemble this part, like what did I already say the material? What material they
what extra? You're talking about like what extra materials, other things you're going to need.
Yeah, or what extra material? Well, also like what material they printed it with, like either PLA, ABS,
right?
Or if you need like a rubber band or something like that to make it
nuts, things like that, hardware.
Yeah. So that's always a good thing to look out for. If you see a lot of details like that, odds are that the model is pretty well put together, and that you'll have better success when you go to print it and assemble it yourself. Anything else you have to add, Will, with that?
Just being on the lookout. I like just to add to the details is also, as you said, printer settings, comments. Sometimes they have comments and reviews. I know on Prusa printers they have reviews, so just kind of be looking out for if you can find what other people have said about it, not just the poster, but if only sometimes people use a model a bunch and no one ever comments on it. That's also possible, but just be looking out for those details. So I'd say that's about the biggest. Those are the biggest things for sure. I think you covered it.
Right. Okay. Cool. So so you kind of now know what to look out for when you're looking for a cool model to download. Granted, sometimes you might not have an option, like if you're looking for a very specific thing, like that dryer part.
Right.
You might not have the ability to select from a few different ones on which one you want to print. It might be the only one, and you're just going to have to hope for the best. But for more popular things, or if you're just looking for a fun thing to run on your printer, you can always look out for those things.
Absolutely.
So, on the next point, the question, Will, why is the model... I downloaded this file. I'm trying to set it up. Why is the model broken?
Well, first of all, quit whining. Secondly, no. So why is the model broken? So there's a few reasons, as we say, the model would be broken. So let's say you load it into your slicer, and it's literally just missing layers. Like some layers are blank. It doesn't look like it's laying down material, and then it starts laying down material again in midair. So, pardon me.
It is a Tuesday after all. So
it is a Tuesday. Yeah, it's been quite a week. So in terms of what kind of could be happening there is you generally have an unclosed mesh. So when we create that mesh that we were talking about in previous episodes, it may not be simply closed. It may have like an open face, and that face causes it to basically have issues actually rendering a layer for each slice. So it doesn't know what is a solid object, what is a closed object. Another piece may be that, simply put, the model itself doesn't has a lot of like too thin walls, as we call it. So these walls are like of zero thickness, and it doesn't know what to do with them. And so then the slicing software also goes, I have no idea what to do with this. This doesn't make any sense.
And you'll get a slicing error, right?
Yeah, you should get a slicing error. Sometimes it'll just create weird like thin walls or try to estimate. So depending on your slicer, it may just try to push through, but you'll see in the slicing like preview, then you'll see chaos basically. It's just like, oh my gosh, what is going on here?
Printing in midair.
I'd say there's a couple reasons why your model will be broken. One is from the mesh itself. Another one is also just modeling error. Again, Thingiverse is an open community. Anyone and everyone can submit files. So if you find that one dryer latch hook thing and the person maybe isn't so great at modeling, that might be on them. And then even no matter how much STL repair you do or mesh repair you do, like we'll talk about in a second, it's just a bad model. And so that's also something you might have to contend with.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of touch on what you mean by mesh repair for some people?
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about this in the troubleshooting. But basically...
sorry, I didn't mean to skip ahead.
No, you're good. But like it's just kind of talking about like to repair it, there are settings in the slicing software that allow you to it'll try to automatically repair it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But yeah, there is some ways to repair meshes if they're just kind of partially broken or open or things like that. But nothing can really be done about a bad model that was made by someone who's just not that good at modeling.
Right. Yeah, and oftentimes it'll be really hard. Like you can download an STL file. You'll be looking at it in either Cura or whatever viewer software or CAD software you have. And it might be really hard to pinpoint where the error is sometimes in the model. So sometimes you might spend hours trying to figure this out if you're obviously really dedicated to trying to print this part. And oftentimes it might be, SolidWorks is usually pretty good about this, but the one area where I've seen people biff on is if you know how SolidWorks works off of solid bodies, right?
Right.
So if you extrude a surface and you don't, and there's an option when you do the extrude command to combine bodies. If the person doesn't do that, then it's going to create two separate bodies, and there might be like a hairline space in between the two bodies. And so it's going to, when you try to slice that, it's going to freak out.
Right. It's going to have these two, technically they looked like they were meeting up or they looked like they were part of one thing, but there's just enough space.
Yeah.
Where it's going to go, oh, this was a separate block made above this thing.
Right. And the one thing that came to mind when you're talking about like scaling down for different parts and having two thin walls, remember, so for those that don't know, Will and I built basically a from the ground up go-kart while we were in college out of my garage. And one of the first things before we really even started the fabrication process on the go-kart was I designed the basic frame in AutoCAD because this was before I knew how to do 3D modeling. Will helped me build that out in SolidWorks. But the problem we were having was we built the original model to the accuracy of like the wall thickness of the tubing that we were going to use, which is like 0.625 inches, right? Right. And so we tried to, and the 3D model on SolidWorks was full scale. It was about 3-4 feet long. Obviously, I had to scale that down to print it because we wanted a little cool printable scale model. But when we did that 0.625 wall thickness in the full-size model was really, really small.
It was insanely small.
Yeah, so I think what we ended up having to do was just bump up the wall thickness by some crazy amount so the printer could actually interpret how to print that part.
Right, we way scaled up the wall thickness just so it would even print at tiny scales.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for that too. Another kind of common thing or a good visual to think about how an STL file might, you can have an STL file, but it might not be printable per se. Is, one thing I've been doing a lot more at work over the past year is 3D scanning. And so a lot of people, it's a common misconception when you 3D scan something. A lot of people think, oh, 3D scan it, boom, you have a nice solid model that's ready to print. And this is actually probably a very, it's becoming more applicable to hobbyists and makers too, not just people that have access to a $50,000, Creaform 3D scanner, because a lot of smartphones now have 3D scanning capabilities.
Right.
So the common misconception is like I said, you 3D scan a part. So let's pretend like we 3D scan this little Baby Yoda trinket that I have here. And then that model is ready to go. And you can export the scan mesh as an STL. So it kind of leads you to believe like you got a cool model ready to print. But in reality, with how most 3D scanning goes, is there's going to be little patches and holes in the scan because the scanner is limited on, the little nooks and crannies that it can get the scanner into to read. So there's going to be disjointed ends, there's going to be holes. And then when you 3D scan something, technically there's no thickness to it. So it's just like a surface model, essentially. So your printer's also not going to know how to do that. So there's some post-processing that you're going to have to do. So that's just a good kind of analogy, I think, for a non-3D printable STL. I don't think you'll ever run into something that extreme on Thingiverse. That's kind of an extreme example, but just kind of a good visual / analogy for the worst case scenario.
Right, exactly.
So, Will, why did the internet lie to me? Why can't I download this file and download it, save it to my computer, upload it to Cura, print it, and then assemble these pieces all trouble-free on my printer?
Well, I think a couple of things. We're going to have to get into digital citizenship, so the internet is probably always lying to you. But also, the key thing is, why did the internet lie to me? Because a lot of people confuse and confound what is 3D printable and what is 3D modelable. As you were actually just kind of introing there, anything is kind of 3D modelable. Seriously, like almost anything can be 3D modeled. Right. You can 3D model things that are incredibly intricate, have infinite scale. They can be infinitely big, infinitely small. They can have infinite number of details. They can be just surface models. They don't have to have thickness. They don't have to have any physical realism to them.
Right.
They can just, they're unbound. However, 3D printing requires the model to have some ability to be made physical.
Right.
And that means that you have to have, when the person modeling it is creating this model, they have to understand that it has to exist in the physical world and how things are made in a physical world. So a big example I have in the classroom all the time is kids wanting characters from their favorite anime 3D printed, but they want it 3D printed at like this scale with the details of a full model that has, capes and tiny daggers and swords and face masks and different hair and different boots. And like, they've got all kinds of crazy detail. And it's a tiny, I'm printing these things on, the school has, very sub $2,000 FDM machines. Like, there's no way that you will get that kind of detail. And so the issue is the person who modeled that STL grabbed a model that was made for animation or that was made for 3D rendering. But the issue is that model or rendering is not made to be made on a 3D printer. It just isn't.
Right.
And so that's why the internet lied to you. Because the internet is naive and would love you to be able to 3D print anything your heart desires. And that's the beauty of Thingiverse. You can upload just about anything you want onto Thingiverse. But
as long as it's the proper file type, it'll go up on there. So
at the end of the day, though, you're not going to be able to print everything on there.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into, I can't remember if we've touched on this in a previous episode or not. If not, we'll definitely talk about it in a future episode. There's a whole facet to engineering and design for additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Like, there's certain design principles that you have to abide by when, you're designing a model so that it prints well. So a lot of the stuff I do at work, or even for at home here for different projects for my car and whatnot, like, I have to design the model with it in mind that this is going to be 3D printed.
Right.
Like you said, if you have a model from a video game that has really complex overhangs or really, I think the best example is hair. Like, I've never seen a 3D printer print hair very well, except maybe there's one model on Thingiverse where it's a lion, but that's designed to be 3D printed. But like, just general hair is not going to print very well. And like you said, very fine details of a person's costume or something. So there's just a lot to keep in mind there, and just go into Thingiverse or wherever you're getting your models from with those reservations in mind, so you don't waste a lot of time trying to print something that's virtually impossible with FDM printing. Now, with SLA printing, where you're printing from resin, you might have better luck printing fine details, because that's what that type of 3D printing is known for.
Right, exactly. And so if you can change up the style of printing, if you have that ability to change up the style of printing, absolutely. And that kind of leads into troubleshooting a little bit. Yeah. And so kind of as Andrew said, if you have the ability to not use the model you're looking at and it's a bad model, don't use it.
Yeah.
But let's say it's like the one thing, it's the dryer handle, it's the only thing that you need, and there's only one of them, and they made it very poorly. Andrew, do you want to introduce us to some troubleshooting tips you have for models from the web?
Yeah, I mean, you might want to start on this topic, because I frankly haven't had much problems with downloading files from Thingiverse. I just probably haven't downloaded enough files yet. I mean, one of them for sure, depending on the file type that you can download, if you can bring it into SolidWorks, like my go-to CAD software is SolidWorks. So anytime you bring in a file, you can run what's called import diagnostics. and it basically, or there's another thing called feature recognition. And that's heavily dependent on the file type. That might only be reserved for STP or step files. I don't know if it can do that with STL files, but I'm pretty sure for import diagnostics you can do with STL files. And that'll basically just do a check of the model and look for disjointed ends or open faces or things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, anytime you can do diagnostics on what the model looks like, it's always really good. And so a few other things that I kind of some general tips that I have, like let's say you are going right into your slicer software. You're not going from that to say a modeling software to check it out. A few things, if you have a lot of weird like legs and intricate pieces, but there's no real great surface that hits the build plate, is to use a raft. So there's going to be a section, an offering that allows you to use a raft. So that what that does is it builds up basically like a plate, rectangular plate of filament of plastic laid out in a grid that's easy to take off once it's done, but it allows these intricate pieces to then lay down onto a much more receptive surface that is other plastic rather than just the bare metal or glass of the bed that you're printing on.
It's like a foundation for a house, basically. You got
exactly
trying to build, your framing into dirt is not going to bode well for strength and longevity, versus putting a giant slab of concrete down, you're going to be a lot better. So it's kind of the same thing. You're putting a slab of plastic down so that, because the plastic is going to bond better to itself, like you said, than bonding to the build plate surface.
Right, and that gets just kind of into the material quality, right? Like that's just how most materials work. And so another thing maybe, kind of building off the house analogy is the support structures. So let's say you have a lot of detail, and a lot of it's got crazy amount of overhangs. And Andrew and I both tend to stay away from support structures just because it's usually a pain in the butt. But if this is the only model you can find and you need the model and it's got overhangs and you can't get it to do it, then I would suggest, biting the bullet, putting in support structure. One thing that can help you with your support structures, though, is you can change the density of the support structure. So if you're having trouble getting it off, you can change the density. You can change the gap between the support structure and the model. So that way, maybe you want it to come free a little easier. You can change the gap, though keep in mind that may alter the detail that you can achieve at those edges between the support structure and your model. So there's support structures like that. There's also scale, just general scale. Like, I mean, if it's just a figurine that you don't exactly like, scale doesn't precisely matter to you, then scale it up as big as you can. Because if you can make the details larger and less intricate, the more likely they are to come out.
Right.
It means you're using more plastic, it means you're using more material, but that's kind of just how you have to do it. Is scaling it up almost always helps with, especially slicer software's understanding what is solid, what is not solid, what's outside the model.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think another point I wanted to add too, like talking about supports, is there's it's in the experimental category, I think, in Cura, but it's called tree supports.
Right.
So, another thing you can do is, if instead of the conventional supports where it's usually just like a grid structure or a zigzag or something, tree supports literally look like a tree and like branches of a tree. Like, it's a very organic looking structure where it's kind of building in a unique pattern from the ground up, and then it's only touching the points of the model where the slicing software analyzes, okay, it's going to need a little support here because it's overhanging out by this much because of this material. So certain materials print better with or without support structures. So that's another thing to keep in mind too, is the material you're printing is going to drive how well your model that you've downloaded from the internet prints. Like I know, like TPU, for instance. Oh, there's Moose.
Here goes Moose.
For instance, TPU, for instance, has a lot of problems with stringing and kind of putting little boogers on the model because of how it likes to ooze. And it's kind of similar with PETG. PETG really likes to string too. So if there's a lot of features on the model that are going to be kind of like the printer is going to be very repetitive and depositing, retracting, moving over, depositing, retracting, you're going to get a lot of stringing. So just keep that in mind as well. So that factor also might determine what material you use to print with. A good rule of thumb is if you're printing something that's relatively complicated, depending on your skill level, always start with PLA. PLA is probably one of the most user-friendly materials to print with. You don't even need a heated build plate. So you can kind of start from there. And then if you want a print that's going to, be durable to the elements or be a little bit more heat resistant, then you can move to like PETG, HIPS, closed loop plastics. You gotta plug that.
gotta plug the CLP UHIPS material. Absolutely. Right. On sale at matterhackers.com now.
So HIPS or ASA, ABS, you name it. You can move to the more advanced materials once you've at least printed it once and have it print successfully.
Yeah, I mean, even now with most models, I'll even print one off in PLA first, just to make sure. That way you also kind of can rule out, is it a material problem or is it my model problem or is it something, because, PLA, you can print almost anything.
Right.
So that way you kind of also rule out, like, is it anything else? Is it something with the model, the slicing software, da-da-da-da-da? But once you rule that out, then, okay, I'll try maybe ASA or I'll try a pre-preg polycarb blend thing that's got...
Try Ultem, the highest, the pinnacle of 3D printing polymers.
Ultem, the ultimate 3D printing.
I wonder why they called it that.
Who knows? Their branding's very smart or very oblivious. Who knows?
And then another thing I think it's important to talk about in regards to troubleshooting with models you're downloading, and this is more applicable to if you're downloading a file set that goes into an assembly. So if you have parts that, because on Thingiverse or Prusa printers, you can download, a folder that has 10 different files in it, and then you print them all in a build pack, and then the idea is you assemble it together. Well, there might be some troubleshooting / tuning that you're going to have to do to ensure all of those files fit together as intended. And this is dependent on your printer's settings, your extrusion. So, if tolerances are a little tight, you might have to adjust your E-steps a little bit so you're not over extruding material and the files actually being printed larger than what it's actually intended to be printed at, because you don't know the tolerances that the person who put this assembly of files together, what the tolerances they designed into the assembly. So, and that also is going to really be dependent, and this is a slight drawback of Thingiverse and a pro for the Prusa printers is, people on Thingiverse can print on thousands of different printers. Basically, any type of printer can print something from Thingiverse. So that ranges all the way from a very basic Creality Ender 3 with, I'd say, pretty decent tolerances to something way more advanced with intense tolerances, and then also you got the SLA printing. So you're going to have different tolerances for someone who prints on that. So just all those things to keep in mind. You might have to do some tuning with your printer's kind of extrusion profile or your Cura settings as well to get things to fit together as they are intended to on the Thingiverse site.
Yeah, I mean, that basically covers it, is just kind of talking about how do you fix it. So if you have to fix it, you can either change your slicer settings, change the model settings, so scale it up, scale it down, change the model settings, or straight up tune the printer differently. You may have to go that far.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It's kind of, there's a lot of different ways you can change things up and make it work. But also one of the things that one of our professors back at UCI told us all the time was, it's almost always cheaper just to buy it. so there's also something just to think about as you're 3D printing this and you're on try number 52 and you've wasted about 6 kilos of filament. Just think about what are you trying to make and can you possibly do it any other way?
Yeah. And then maybe this, that could be another topic for like a subtopic for another episode, is there are also sites where you can buy STL files. And you can purchase them, and most likely they're going to be a little bit better put together. At least you'd hope, because you're paying money for it. Or if you're having problems printing it, you can contact the person and say, "Hey, I paid you money, help me." So
exactly. There's a little more supposed
accountability to
accountability, exactly, culpability in terms of that. Yeah,
absolutely. So maybe we can talk about a few of those sites in a future episode. But I think most people, I haven't actually even delved into looking at purchasable STL files yet, but I know it's out there. And if you're looking for really specific files or something, you might have to buy it. So that's also an option as well. And I think the one last topic that I just kind of thought of, it's not on our agenda, that we should talk about in regards to free 3D printing files that you're downloading off of sites like this, is the Creative Commons license that all of these are under. So,
right.
You want to be ethical. You want to have, some moral principles when you're doing this. Is when you're downloading a file off the internet for free, it's downloaded under what's called a Creative Commons license, which basically means you can download it for free, print it for free, but you're not supposed to go and turn around and sell it on Etsy or something like that. And make
absolutely.
Money. Right, because it's not technically your property. You're just kind of using it for fun, basically, or for your personal use.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty is Thingiverse and Prusa printers both have all of these. For each model, people can pick a certain license that they want to share it under. Mm-hmm. And so some people do allow you to share it with some kind of you have to do attribution if you want to sell it.
Okay.
But that's just adding some complications here. I would say always default to just thinking that at least, it's probably not good to sell something I just downloaded off the internet and started 3D printing.
Yeah.
Because again, it's not technically it's not your art. It's not your copyright. It's not your, however you want to think about it. It isn't your intellectual property. You're just grabbing it and putting it through a machine. It'd be like, taking a picture from the internet of the Mona Lisa, printing it and selling it for the same price as the Mona Lisa. A, no one would buy it, and B, it's definitely fraud. So you got to be careful with that kind of thing.
Yeah, no. I mean, you can for sure download something, and if your friend doesn't have a printer, and you're like, hey, can you print me this cool airplane model or something? Like, here's something I downloaded off Thingiverse, just a little cool. This is a Boeing 787 model. So for those that are just listening, it's a cool little 3D model of one of my favorite commercial jets. So if you have a friend that's like, hey, that looks cool, when they see it on your desk or whatever, can you print me one? That's fine. But as long as you're not going around trying to make money off it, I think that's kind of where the line's drawn and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're not passing it off as your own, giving attribution if you're, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. And it all comes down to the just being honest. And I think, for the most part, I think people do pretty well by that. And the maker community will know if a model is pretty popular and you see it for sale on some site, it's going to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, and I mean it's pretty good at self policing as well. Yeah. I know we've got a lot of people saying, "Hey, didn't you rip this off?" But also the beauty is the community is really open to remixing and doing other things. So if you feel like, oh, I want to I did a remix or I changed up this thing and I want to push it out there, feel free to do so, because most people will be like, oh, that's great that you took the thing I did and added to it. I love that.
Right. Yeah.
So as long as you give attribution, I think most people are always happy to to see that. Oh, some people are doing other things with the thing I put out there.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's also a really good point. So yeah, that's kind of the sum of the two most popular free 3D printable model sites that you can download files for and print, and it's a great way to get started, especially if you have little to no CAD experience, but you've got a 3D printer. The holidays are coming up. Let's say you got a 3D printer for Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate, and you want to print something on it, but you don't really know what to print other than the stock files that come preloaded on the SD card, which aren't really that fun. These are great places to go to really get your feet wet with 3D printing various files of all different levels of intricacy. So it's a cool place to get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, that's going to pretty much do it for episode 5. As always, if you guys have any comments or questions, if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to leave a comment on the video, and either Will or myself will be happy to answer your question or address your comment.
Always.
And as always, you can also email us any questions or comments at unwindingthespool, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will get back to you probably shortly here. We both work full time, so we monitor that email. So we'll get back to you if you guys have any.
Somebody will get back to you soon.
Yeah. But yeah, in episode 6, that is going to be a very important episode. If you're listening to this podcast right now and you're thinking, should I continue listening to these guys? The next episode is going to be very important. I can't stress this enough. It is talking about being a good troubleshooter. And that's probably one of the most important, crucial skills to have as someone who runs a 3D printer, is knowing how to troubleshoot. So it'll help you solve your failures, because you are bound to have failures, and give you a lot better chance at printing things successfully.
Absolutely. I can't wait for us to make that one. That's going to be really fun.
Yeah.
And I hope you guys really enjoyed listening to this one. This was a great step off for those of you just coming from the buying your first 3D printer episode. This is a great episode also to listen to.
Right. Exactly. So thank you again all so much for either watching or listening, and make sure you guys stay tuned for all future episodes to come.
Have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.